Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today, our special guest is Jeffrey Fidelman. Did I pronounce that right, Jeffrey?
Fiddleman.
Fidelman. Jeffrey Fidelman. We'll be talking about business growth and strategy. He founded Fidelman Company in 2015 to serve the growing need for fundraising strategy among early to mid-stage companies and has since grown the firm to over 40 remote individuals. He has acted as an interim CFO and chief operating officer for dozens of companies through their financial transactions, including but not limited to capital raises, business sales, and business purchases.
Mhm.
Jeffrey, excited to have you on. I think we're going to have a great chat. Tell me, first question I have for you is, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were in school? Was it this?
That's a great question. Um, what did I want to be when I grew up? I think the first thing I wanted to be in second or third grade was actually a cop. Funny enough.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, it's a teenage version of myself. He would have laughed at that notion, but I think that was the very first profession I wanted to go into. My uncle was a cop. Um, and fast forward when I actually started thinking about what I wanted to do, I always wanted to get involved with helping companies grow and helping them become either more efficient or figure out complex problems that they had in terms of growth or expansion or ideation. And for a while, I thought that that to me looked like consulting. And right before I started this firm, I had a choice to go into venture or consulting. I ended up choosing venture. And lo and behold, the way that I look at even what I do today is very much more consultative in nature rather than it is as an investment banker. In terms of working with companies, trying to figure out their story, their narrative, how to present to investors, how to overcome key rebuttal points of what they're trying to do. So I think a lot of what I wanted to do was work with a lot of different companies. We were speaking just before the podcast at the fact that I love doing what I do. I will wake up and have my first call with a nut milk blender company, and then a free space optical communications company, then a woman's skincare company, and then a fintech company, and that's basically all before lunch. And I really couldn't imagine doing anything differently today because I love working with entrepreneurs and founders and across every possible industry that you can imagine.
well, your second grade self would probably be proud that you're still helping the public mitigate risk.
Sure.
Just a different way. Maybe a little bit less violent, but preserving business risk is a way to keep people safe. So one way to look at it.
Sure.
So when you went to undergrad, what did you major in, and did you have any solid career plans at the time? And where did you go? What was college like for you?
Sure. So, college was interesting, career was interesting. I was brought up always to work. My both my parents immigrants from Soviet Union, so they grew up with kind of the immigrant mentality of, always be working, in a sense. So I had odd jobs growing up, working in an auto mechanic place, at a pizzeria, at a gym, as a lifeguard, kind of through high school and into college. And I started college. I went to Baruch in New York. I grew up in Long Island, so the commute was 40 minutes away. I lived at home. And I started in 2007 and 2008, I started a real estate business. Um,
Great
uh,
timing.
Great timing. Kind of. I
Sorry.
each their own. It was good timing for me because what ended up happening, there were a lot of people coming into the States, especially into New York, a lot of Chinese speaking and Russian speaking people.
Hmm.
And because of I speak Russian fluently and as a native speaker, really, I was able to bridge that gap with a lot of those Russian speaking individuals coming into the city. At the same time, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into Harvard, where I transferred into in my junior year,
Hmm.
which is very small statistic of people can actually transfer in, and I ended up transferring in and heading out to
Can I,
Boston.
can I ask you a pause question? You
Sure.
were starting your real estate business while you're going to Harvard?
Not only did I start it, I was running it. Every Thursday, I would take a train, a Acela, from Boston to New York, spend Thursday to Sunday in the city, and then Sunday night go back over to Boston to hit classes on Monday morning. Um, so I did that for about 2 years through graduation. I ended up selling. Yeah, yeah, that was fun.
For anyone
Um,
listening, please, if you think you guys work hard when you're in college, just listen to this story and then maybe like, recalibrate.
Well, look, I have kids now, and I'll tell them to get internships because it wasn't about, hey, you need to make money and figure this out, but go try to do everything. At least you'll figure out what you don't want to do. And that very much I believe in philosophy. But at the time, I needed to make money. I knew that having kind of building a resume was also really important.
Mhm.
And I was very young at the time. So in my mind, it was like, okay, graduated from Harvard, finance, right? Finance time, let's do it. And and I went into finance. I spent, as I think I mentioned, I spent the better part of a decade in finance. Half of that was at Morgan Stanley, and the other half was at HSBC.
Okay.
And I've nothing, I mean, nothing but good. I have really good stories to tell about the amount of intellectual capital that I was exposed to at both of those firms and how much just through osmosis I was able to learn. I mean, walking into Morgan Stanley on my first day, I thought that I thought people were speaking a different language. Like it was English, but I did not understand what people were talking about for the most part. Um,
Really?
so that was fun. And I really think like this whole work from home, remote work, I have a lot of thoughts on it. But having that exposure, I
Mm.
credit a lot of my kind of business education just from being adjacent to others that were having those conversations.
I want to ask you about that's a very interesting point about learning a new language, and you are at least bilingual, if not more than two languages. So you said native Russian. Did
Mhm.
you have to, did you learn English? Like, were you born in the United States?
I was born here. I was born in
You're
the
born
city.
here.
My parents spoke Russian to me growing up, so
Okay,
I
so Russian at home, English in public.
yes.
Did you find that there were similarities between learning the language of finance with like learning language in general? Because one thing that I found pretty interesting is when I'm talking to people that might be entry level into marketing, they're like, man, the amount of acronyms and jargon that's in this industry, it's like learning a new language. And I heard that this week, and I'm hearing you say it with finance. And I just wanted to kind of touch on that topic is what similarities in learning business is it like with learning language?
Oh, that's a good question and probably similar answer. They say that the best way to learn a language is immersion. I mean, this is 100% what I was talking about, that I was able to really learn because I was immersed in it on a day in and day out basis. And I think that what is the difficulty? It's understandable language. Like I understood the definition of the words that were being used, just not the definition of the sentence that they were being used in. Credit curves, yield swaps, syndicate, pre-post IPO trading, block trades. Like I understood the words, but I didn't really understand, how they were being used until I put it into context and began working there. So I think a lot of it is that whether it's marketing acronyms or in finance or in all of the companies that exist in between, all companies have acronyms. I think people need to be aware that they're industry specific and not universal. Um, but people that begin working in those businesses, it's okay to feel totally lost when you're switching career paths or industries. And it is a new language to learn.
I think that's just part of being honest.
Mhm.
It's show up until you grow up, not fake it till you make it. That's how I like to look at it.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, and look, the idea of imposter syndrome, I think everyone has that at some point. I think if you're not feeling imposter syndrome, then you're not doing enough.
I
Then you're
would
not,
rather have imposter syndrome every day of the year and continually look back and see how much I've grown than
yes.
feel like I'm the man who's arrived and I've got it all figured out and repeat the same year for the next 30.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, everybody wants to be, the most important, the center of attention in every room that they walk into, which is fine, but you have to get there. And I think the progress or process of doing that in terms of feeling imposter syndrome, being in a room where there are smarter people around you, um, I think that's the way to go about it.
One thing you mentioned earlier about being physically on site and versus the remote environment, COVID largely had a part to do with the global restructuring of office space and things like that.
Mhm.
But you said that the immersion for being on site and being able to get the intellectual capital from the people that were geographically near you, what are your thoughts on remote versus, on site versus hybrid in terms of work environments and pros and cons?
Uh, I I definitely have seen a benefit from in-person gatherings. Like our team does at least biannual like whole team offsite trips. And I would love to increase that. I have been and I have thought before, and probably will continue to think about opening up a proper office where everybody can be there in one place. I mean, my first job before even Morgan Stanley, because at the time we needed to get licensed before applying, I worked in, like a boiler room type of place, or like Wolf of Wall Street, one of the first like scenes. Very simple. I mean, we were selling Alcoa and Merck and stuff like that, not penny stocks, but it was, I don't know, seven people, seven guys in a room that barely was 200 feet. It was just desks back to one another. And all of us are calling, pitching Alcoa or Merck or the flavor of the day to people. And we're, not this close, and we're on Zoom now, but they were 3 feet away from me. And there's seven people around me, and everyone's yelling into the phone. And and to think about that, and we were able to successfully accomplish our goals and what we needed to do. If you say the same thing now to people, they can't even fathom the idea of standing next to one person on a headset on a call, let alone a room full of people doing the same.
And that's such an interesting story. I love that.
I mean,
I love that scene that you're talking about too, because the, not to get too deep into film, but there's a reason that movie I think will have lasting power in terms of business movies because there's so many memorable scenes, that being one of them.
Yeah, I mean that was the world of fun, and I got into finance at the very end of that. I was getting into finance where I was calling people and they were already saying like, "Oh, you're like a Bernie Madoff. We don't want to deal with you," because it was right after 08, 09,
Yeah.
2010, 11, like when all that stuff happened.
I believe in a quote that goes along the lines of you can't make a market, but you can create opportunity. So can you explain a little bit about the time between the 08, 09, where you were doing what you were doing in the real estate and the finance, and then you made the jump to the Fidelman and Co? Because I think you said you started that around 2015.
2015, yeah. So
What was that transition like, and how did you know this was the next step and to take that leap?
I I left venture and started that company 3 days after I got back from my honeymoon. And for everyone listening, I do not recommend doing that at all, at all. Do it before or way after, but not
Mm.
not right away. But I always had the entrepreneurial itch. I always wanted to, for better or for worse, work for myself and create something. Not even create money or economic value, but create something that was mine. And um, and coming out that week, basically, I didn't have anything lined up. There was no business plan. There was nothing. There was kind of like, okay, let's figure out how I'm going to make money now. And at the time, because of the venture fund and how we put everything together, I already identified there being a relative gap in the market of people who wanted to start businesses or were early in their stages of starting businesses, are good at what they do, whether it's ideation or operation, but they're not necessarily great at putting together a pitch deck or putting together a financial model. And quite frankly, as much as they need to know the content of going into both, they don't need, no founder needs to be an expert at putting together a deck.
Sure.
You need to be an expert in pitching, in the narrative, and what their company does in operations. But to sit there and say a founder needs to be able to put together a deck is really like, it's the same thing like saying a founder needs to be able to code and do taxes and do every single thing in a company. And while I agree with that from a superficial level, when you're actually building a business and running a business, a founder doesn't have the bandwidth to be an expert in all of those things. They start delegating tasks. And
I think
as
no, sorry to interrupt you, but I think to that point, a founder at least needs to go from 0 to 1, but on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 to 1 gets you in the playing field. But a founder's use to get them from a 1 to a 10 in any of those things, not the best use of time.
no, no, they need the best use of time is to start to delegate, to grow, to execute on a vision and a mission.
Mhm.
Um, and especially when thinking about what actually exists in the market, when thinking about fundraising specifically for early stage companies, there really aren't a lot of options. You have your advisors out there that will help with materials, and that's how we started. You have your advisors out there, many of which are unlicensed, trying to help raise capital for companies that are doing it really in nefarious ways where if that was ever caught to be the case, all money has to be returned, everyone gets in trouble, and it's just not worth anyone's time.
Mm.
And then you have these outrageous fees that a lot of advisors charge, disappear for 30 or 60 days, and come back and say, I reached out to everyone, sorry, there's nothing really for you. So knowing that that market both exists, but exists in really kind of a broken model, that's what we wanted to address. In the first 5 years of this business, from 2015 to 2019, maybe even 2020, we were a consulting firm. I would joke that we're an investment bank without the banking. So we'll put together all of your fundraise materials. We'll put together a fundraise strategy book, basically, and give it to our clients as a last deliverable to say, look, here are our pitch book leads. Here is how you put together a sequence, your email copy. Here's basically best practices that you can Google, but we've customized it for you, your business, and your fundraise. And invariably, 6, 10, 12 weeks later, those same founders would come back to us and say, Jeff, this is great. Can you do it for us?
Business opportunity, entrepreneur, the light
And
bulb.
that's where the light bulb, so to speak, went off and or at least dimly went off and said, oh, okay, maybe we can move towards productization of fundraising. So what started as a service became what is now a managed service that I think about, which is fundraise as a service. It is our infrastructure, our analysts, our database, our processes that are put into our clients that we manage. And over the next, I mean, really over the next month, we'll have it ready to release, but over the next couple of months, what we're going to be doing is further moving it to productization so that we can still provide the process, service, structure, CRM database to clients, but without the analyst overlay, so we can do it in a more economical way for the clients. So like full service versus self-service investment banking.
I want to just make a highlight to the point because a lot of listeners in here are at a certain stage in business, whether they're trying to make a decision on the next step or they might be feeling confused or anxious about what decision to make. But it sounds like your decision-making process in how you've evolved your service was largely in part due to the fact that you identified a market need and then you're like, oh, we can fill that need. And then you find another market need. Oh, we can fill that need. And then it's not just like but then you productize it. That's the key word I'm trying to get at. So what are some, obviously with your experience in financial analysis and consulting, it's not like you're just an artist that didn't know how to do systems and processes, right? There's a structure, but how do you go about looking at productizing a service? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, get hung up at that roadblock.
Well, first of all, there's a great book that I'm now reading for the second time over. It's called Productize
Okay.
by Aisha Tierney Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any economic revenue from this, but it is a good book, and she writes through how to go through those processes. And look, I mean, To answer your question, it's really hard. It's really hard. It is incredibly difficult. And if all of the answers were just so simple, then they would be simply chosen and people wouldn't get stressed or anxious or anything about it. And I can say that, 10 years is the culmination of so many mistakes, of so many choices that were made that were not, well, I don't want to say not good, but were not choices that ultimately resulted in the goal that we were trying to accomplish. Going into demand, you said we have demand. We have had demand for go-to-market strategy. We've had demand for social media management. We've had all of these things that were demanded that once upon a time we tried to fill basically every demand that came into the firm. And for a while, especially when starting out, I would joke that, when I pick up the phone, yes is the answer. Now, what is the question? And what I've recognized over time, and especially now, is that we found what we are really, really good at doing, which is around fundraising, the advisory of, and actually helping clients execute on that. And we don't do anything else anymore. So one
That's
thing I would say is that
interesting.
what has helped kind of drive depth and expansion is not expansion of services, but focusing more in on the services that we do provide and just becoming the best at it. And I think that's really helped a lot. In terms of like process and making decisions, I have a very scientific approach to it, like scientific method, quite literally the definition. We have a control, we have a variable, we run the test, we have a hypothesis going into it, we run the test. Anything we do, we try to do for at least 60 to 90 days at minimum. Unless there are mega red flags or the whole thing is blowing up, we'll let it run. And at the end of that period of time, we pause or take stock and have a management meeting and try to understand what worked, what didn't work. And it's very, very rarely binary. So what ends up happening is that you take the stuff that worked, you re-input it, now it's the control. The variable is what learnings you've made, and then you run the process again. And we do that continuously, whether it's fundraise as a service or certain things operationally, internally. We're not to make extensive changes or material changes, but enough that will continue driving value to our internal operations, which in turn does to our clients. So just do it. Basically, the answer to your question, Nike got it right. Just do it. Unless it's, a major pivot or departure from your brand, your vision, your idea, or it's a $200,000 expense, just do it. Even if you want to build a product, do it manually. And that's what we did and are doing. We have the process, we have everything done. There's no point to build a $200,000 CRM right now to launch it. It doesn't need to be done. Just go.
Two things stood out to me in that answer. One was figuring out through trial and error, systematically using the scientific method, so the approach to how you control for inputs, outputs, and then you pretty much tell a story around it. It's not good, bad. It's binary. What happened and why. So that stood out to me. But the other thing that stood out to me was finding the service or product, the service that you can be the best at, and then just continue to be the best at. Very rarely nowadays in sports, for those that have children going through this student athlete journey, do you see someone who's the best in the world at swimming, who's also the best in the world at basketball, who's also the best in the world at wrestling? They're all winter sports. You kind of got to pick one.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, honing in what you do really, really well as a business, I think is incredibly important. Because then it actually makes it easier to expand. There's a ton of services that can be like if we just focus on fundraising, there are still a ton more services that we can and probably will expand to over the next couple of years. But there's no reason like for us to go into go-to-market strategy just because we have a go-to-market strategist and clients that are requesting it.
Right. Don't try to have the Titanic take a 90-degree turn.
No,
Doesn't work out that way.
no. Take a lifeboat and go wherever you want.
Yeah. So, question I have on you with your service for your fundraising, what are some of the ways that you support startups in achieving success in that area? What are some of the things that make your service the best in your client's eyes and your eyes?
Aligned incentives. I say aligned incentives because take aside the strategy work, like preparing a deck, a model, because pretty much everyone everywhere is going to charge time and materials just like we do. So, the alignment of incentives is I'm gonna get you a deck you like, you're gonna pay me hourly, and everyone's happy, hopefully, based on the output. On the fundraise side, when you think about advisors, when you think about bankers, typically a banker will take in company A, call John Smith the investor, company B, John Smith the investor, company C, John Smith the investor. And the reality is that for those types of bankers, their incentive lies with pleasing John Smith the investor, not necessarily the companies that come in. That's why they do the diligence they do. That's why they handle things the way they do, which quite frankly is fine when you're a $100 million company, revenue company, or 50 million revenue company, or what have you. When you look at early stage companies, there's a misalignment of incentives there entirely, because the company is paying what little money they have or access to the advisor, who's then turning around anyway to who their actual clients and business relationships are with, the investors. So when you think about what that process looks like, and maybe how our process looks like that varies from them, is that I always say, tongue in cheek, nothing we do is proprietary. And a lot of advisors in my space, especially in the early stage, when they hear me say that, they kind of chuckle a little bit and they say, okay, well, what do you do? And I can do it on the podcast here, and I will, and I tell them step by step exactly what we do and how we do it.
But it's
And
the
I've
execution.
gotten open jaws before.
It's the execution that's what separates it, though, right?
It's the execution, it's the ability to actually put all the infrastructure together. And frankly, now that we've been doing this for quite some time, we have, like, what's proprietary, I suppose, is our data at this
Mm.
point. And look, the reality is in fundraising, what people need to accept, and oftentimes it's hard to do, is that there's no silver bullet in fundraising. There's no one thing, do this one thing and you're going to raise capital. It doesn't exist. It never will exist. So knowing that and trying to enter a space where we actually give value to what is, statistically speaking, a market where most companies on a timeline of 1 to 5 years are going to fail. They're
Hmm.
going to fail. Early
What's
stage
it, like
companies,
80% roughly?
yeah, it's very high. So how do we provide value and not necessarily take reputational risk on either by representing a very small handful of clients to an even smaller set of investors?
Mm.
And that's why we put together Fundraise as a Service, because frankly, it's taking best practices that are written online. We have access to PitchBook, to Preqin, Fintrix, Dakota, ZoomInfo, all of the token investor lead characters out there, and our own CRM that we've been enhancing and enriching over the course of time of reaching out. And effectively, one of our analysts becomes an extension of our client, ABC Company. So Alex is calling from ABC, Alex is emailing from abccompany.com, so that from the investor's perspective, it's the company that reaches out to them directly. We don't do mass email blasts. There's not 1,000 emails a week or 1,000 emails a day. It's highly personalized. It's highly qualified, so that when our founders actually do get on the phone with an investor, it's as close to a warm introduction as they're going to get with cold outreach. And that's the process that we run for them. And what's beneficial to them still is, not to mention the weekly reporting, weekly meetings that we have, myself included, the pitch advisory, and we're always available ad hoc. But the infrastructure that we build for our clients stays there after we leave. All the investor contact information, all of the sequences, all of the copy, all of that is our clients. Now, most of the time, they end up coming back and hiring us again for a later seed round or stage round. But if they wanted to bring on their own analyst and get their own lead sources, plug that person in and they could run their IR operations going forward.
One thing that you mentioned earlier was a marketing term that I like to talk about, which is the difference between a cold lead and a warm lead.
Sure.
I, Traditionally, marketers talk about this upside down equilateral triangle as being like a funnel, right? Where you go the coldest at the top to the largest demographic all the way down to the bottom where you're getting it to a sales conversion. I think what you're doing in marketing speak would be called ABM, or account-based marketing, because you're doing high research, high personalization, small number of potential TAM, total addressable market, and you're doing everything you can to make that water room temperature. So
Mhm.
I don't think that they're cold. They're definitely not cold leads, because that would be if you were sending 5,000 automated emails a month, roughly. You're sending X amount of emails per month, but they're all highly, and that's the difference, I think, in um, sending 35,000 emails and getting no replies versus sending 35 emails and getting 10 replies.
Well, so on that, I want to touch on that. Absolutely agreed. And what we do is we sequence weekly so that we can have those weekly calls with our clients and adjust strategy as needed. But what's more important, and going off of what you just said, so many people, founders, marketers, otherwise, focus in on, hey, my conversion rate is 2%. I put 100 leads into the top of funnel, I'll get 2 out. Great. Now I need to put 1,000 leads top of the funnel, I'll get 20 out. I put 10,000 leads, I get 200 out. And the reality is that so many people think that way, but what they should be thinking about is, how do we get our conversion rate higher? How do we change 2 to 3%? How do we go 3 to 5%? And that's what we always think about. And I mean, last year we pretty much exclusively focused on those types of metrics, where I don't want my analysts to work harder and just to jam more people into the top of the funnel just on a X% conversion. The more personalization you do, the more qualification you do, inherently your conversion rate increases. So for the same input, 100 leads on a weekly basis, let's say, that's going into top of funnel, we're hoping to convert more and more over the course of time. A, because of the way that we're filtering the leads themselves going into top of funnel, but B, because we're increasing our conversion rate with this personalization and qualification, so that the whole process gains more efficiency.
Sometimes more does not equal better.
No,
Um,
absolutely not. And what's funny is we had opposite conversations, because does less equal more? And one of our analysts a few months ago we were on a team call, and he asked, like, does it does does it matter how many people I'm putting into the top of funnel, or does it matter how many qualified meetings are getting booked? And the answer, I mean, the question was not rhetorical, but the answer was really clear, that our clients judge us, and how I would like to be judged by our clients is, how many qualified and interested investor calls does the client have, does the founder have? It's the same way that our analysts get monthly bonuses based on hitting that type of quota. And
mhm.
that's what matters to us more. So I don't care if our analyst is shoving in 200 leads or 100 leads. I mean, I don't care. I care to a point of,
Sure.
let's focus on maximizing the efficiency of the conversion rate, not just maximizing putting more and more leads on a weekly basis into that top of funnel.
In marketing speak, we talk. You said something earlier. There's not a silver bullet. I like the analogy. There's 100 golden BBs. There's 100 inputs that try to get you to that one KPI. For you, in this instance, that KPI might be qualified booked meetings, right? But like, there's 100 things that go into that one output, right? And a recent example in marketing for me was, I had a client with a, very sizable marketing budget for the industry and everything, aggressively wants to grow. And one week we tried spending more on ads and just running many more ads. And the weekly sales goal was met, but the KPI that I like to anchor back to, I'm sorry, is the marketing efficiency ratio, or the MER, which is, layman's terms really speak, says, if I put $1 into marketing, how many do we get out?
Like
Right?
ROI.
Yeah, it's similar to ROI. Great. So we hit the sales goal, but the MER was like a 12, which was not the MER goal. So I didn't feel good about it, but the sales team did. And then the next week, I was like, let's spend 10%. And we didn't quite hit the sales goal, but the ROI was 91. So for every $1 you get $91. And the sales team was like, oh no, this guy is falling. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So the balance is, how do we get the sales? How do we, it's always a balance, right? It's never binary. I think that's one of the themes of our conversation today. It's like, then there's somewhere in the middle, right? Between the amount of spend and the amount of ad creative, and we can hit both the sales goal and the MER, the ROI. And that's sort of the one of the secrets that 10 years of experience probably helps you to get to.
Sure. And look, and it's really all about aligning incentives as well. Even internally, I look at that in terms of our team. If there should never be an action that someone does against a colleague or against the company for their own benefit, right? Everything that everyone does should benefit themselves as well as the person next to them. And if the choice is, there should never be a choice of one or the other. Right? At least in our firm, there isn't. So if you're helping someone, like things will come back around and there's note taken and like that benefit will come back around to you, right? So similarly to whether it's client relationship with an advisor or internal incentives aligned, I don't want to see the analysts shoving more and more leads in top of funnel just to hit their quota because it's not going to work that way. They need to be more efficient. They need to be more personalized. There needs to be more personalization in terms of what that qualification looks like, because our clients would be happy in that case. And going all the way back to like, why start your own business? You know, they say you work for someone, you have one boss. You work for yourself, you have 100 bosses.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you know, that's what I tell my team as well. Look at me as a medium of communication from our clients. Like I will never independently have a different emotional state than our clients. Our clients are happy, I'm happy, everyone should be happy. Our clients are not happy, then I'm not happy, then nobody should be happy. And it's not really like, it's not me. I'm the man in the middle, basically between the clients and the rest of our team. And that's how I
Don't
look.
shoot the messenger here, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's I'm taking that frame for my own team now because what I one of the challenges I find with market specific to marketers is that if a marketer has a KPI of, I got this many responses to my campaign, but the client says the responses weren't great and it didn't result in business for him, we can't be happy about that. Like
Right.
that's not something that is like job security if the client is happy. And I need to really take that frame. That's a great thought there. Well, Jeffrey, I have one more question for you. We're coming up on time. I lied. I have two questions.
Okay.
First one's a bit more deep. Second one's not. Last question I have for you is knowing what you know now and knowing where you want to go. If you could, at the end of the day, speak to yourself at the end of the road where maybe you're 80 years old and you don't have, maybe you're still doing what you're doing. Warren Buffett's got a great track record. He's been doing it for a long time. But let's just say you're at Warren Buffett's age. What would you hope to have? How would that conversation go with present day and future state Jeffrey? What would you like to say to that person? What would you like to ask them?
Well, I guess ask my older self.
Hmm.
I don't know. You know, I know a lot of people will say, was it worth it? Um, I would like to think I have more balance in life now than to eventually ask myself that. I I I don't know. I mean, I that's a really tough question to answer. Would you have done anything differently? I suppose would be something that I would ask myself later in life if I could now travel into the future without knowing like, hey, how's your health? Hey, how much money did you make? Hey, did you do what you wanted to do? But very simply, would you have done anything differently? I think maybe that would be the question that I would ask.
So you're just making sure incentives are aligned with yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm a relatively reflective person.
Hmm.
Um, and looking back on things, I think that, you can only consider something a loss or a failure if you didn't learn from it. How many times did I try to set up a business and it completely didn't work out? How many times did we try to launch a service from this business and it didn't work out? How many times did I say something that I probably shouldn't have said with my wife or my kids or something along those lines? And the reality is that as long as there's a lesson to learn and there's personal growth or business growth to come from it, then it's not a total loss. Um, and you carve your path forward in that way. So without knowing what happens between now and 50 plus years from now, I guess 40 plus years from now, unfortunately, when I'm 80, to ask myself, what questions did you make it? Did you do this? Did anything else? I think I would just ask myself, would I have done anything differently? And I would hope the answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's why we're sitting where we're sitting, trying
Yep.
to, going back to when you were in college, we're working around the clock and traveling around the I-95 corridor to make it happen.
Yep. Yep. And I ended up in Connecticut, right on that corridor.
Well, the last question is a lot less deep, Jeffrey. Appreciate your time today. Where can people reach you if maybe they're a startup that wants to, get help with their funding, or maybe they just want to, get in touch and learn more? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. Always happy to chat with people to the extent I'm available. Um, Bounce ideas off, just talk about new businesses. It's something I really genuinely enjoy doing. So name is Jeffrey Fidelman. My email is jeffrey@fidelmanco.com, fidelmanco.com. That's our website. There's more information about us there. And and again, the team is fully remote. I'm up in Connecticut. I make it down into New York City probably once a week, once every other week. So always happy to have a coffee or a session with people. And yeah, I really enjoy this conversation, Ross. So thank you again for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. Everyone listening, I hope this was a valuable brainstorm that enhances your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. I know I left inspired by the stories I heard. I don't have any advertisements on the show. So the only way the show grows is if you share it with a friend. So if you found today to be interesting, my only ask is please share it. The only other advice I have for you is to go forth and be well. Thanks so much.